and it's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming. So today I really want to talk to you about power. And I want to suggest to you that the idea that we have about power at the moment desperately needs reimagining, and that every single person has played a vital role in that, and that you can speak up online and do the same. So I want to talk mainly about three things. The first thing I want to talk about is why we need to reimagine power. Secondly, I want to talk about where our flawed understanding of power comes from. And lastly, I want to talk about how you can change it online. So firstly, why we need to reimagine power? Well, we just need to look around the world to answer this question. If we look around, we can see that 91% of the world's heads of government are all male. We can see that throughout history, our inventors, our leaders, our politicians and political figures that we look up to, they all look the same, act the same, from the same neighbourhoods and towns. Also, we can see that, for example, Johns outnumber women in FTSE 100 companies as CEOs. And even if you are lucky enough to win at the DNA lottery of life and the name lottery of life, and you are called John and you're in these positions of power, this is still an unrealistic expectations on you. And this is partly why things like mental illnesses, as well as depression, anxiety, and ultimately suicide are highest amongst young white men. Even those who we assume might benefit from the system definitely don't in many ways. Now, lots of things have caused this, from sexism to racism to social immobility. But in my opinion, from what I can see, there's one thing that really underlines all of these. And that is the way that we have been taught to see power, and the idea that we are only supposed to see power in certain people above others. So just as an example, whenever I speak up about the Tampon Tax Campaign, which is a campaign I started to axe the 5% tax on period products, and I'll talk more about that a bit later. But whenever I speak up about it, people are somehow surprised. Like, just as an example, when I got to write my very first newspaper article for a national newspaper, I was really excited. I thought it would be great for the campaign, and also maybe it can help inspire other people to stand up, tell their stories, and speak up about what they think is important in the world. But what kind of overshadowed this thought was quickly what I saw to be the comments left on the news article. And like, naively, I didn't think this would be a problem. But all of these comments were kind of the same, and one of them really kind of just stood out to me. And this one was someone who questioned how many men I had slept with in order to secure the publication of this article. And lots of them were kind of echoing these same ideas. And I just found that really impactful and really awful, but also telling of the fact that we are taught to see sex primarily in women, and not thoughts or opinions or campaigns of our own. So to ensure that this no longer happens, all we need to do is really reimagine power. And I say all we need to do, like, this is going to be really difficult, of course, but it desperately needs happening for every single person in society. So in order to kind of think about what we're up against, I feel like it's quite important to talk about the origins of these ideas and why we're taught to see power only in certain people. And there are lots of different origins to this, but my absolute favourite is the story of Pandora. And lots of people know this story of Pandora. They think that Pandora was a mythological first woman who Zeus brought down to the world, or the ancient Greek world, in order to create the world that we know today. And she was powerful as this first woman. But actually, a lot of this is a real misconception. So first of all, I want to suggest to you that Pandora was actually not at all powerful. So firstly, she was actually brought down from Zeus with a veil over her face, which is really common across most of ancient Greece. So her face was veiled, but also the veil was an extension of the domestic home. So it kind of showed that she wasn't necessarily even a public figure. Secondly, in Hesiod's poetry, when he wrote this in the 7th century BC, she was also brought down with a crown of monsters on her head. Now, these monsters literally spoke on her behalf, so she never actually had any chance to speak or air her views or voices. Not only this, but Pandora didn't even have a box. A lot of people think that she opened her Pandora's box, right? But actually this didn't even exist. What she actually had, which translates from Hesiod's poetry, is a storage jar. And lots of people think this storage jar maybe relates to her vagina, but that has yet to be proven. But when she opened this storage jar, she basically destroyed the world. She brought about all of the awful things that we see today, like poverty and famine and illness, and of course also women. And these are all explicit in Hesiod's poetry, and yet we don't really see them necessarily today. This whole story of Pandora essentially cautioned the empowerment of women. It definitely did not encourage it. And what's interesting about Pandora is that we're still telling this exact same story today. For example, if you look at many mainstream newspapers, from the BBC to the Independent, you can see that they're comparing this idea of Pandora and chaos with Theresa May's handling of Brexit. And if you're not convinced by that story, or you think perhaps maybe this is just a Britain problem, it's definitely not. All you have to do is look over to America to see the exact same stories being told. For example, with Hillary Clinton, across her presidential campaign, she was tirelessly compared to Medusa in a similarly demeaning way. Also, she was hailed to be elusive by the exact same voters that deemed Donald Trump to show the skills that he needed to be successful. This idea that we have to judge men and women differently in terms of power is what's holding most of us back. So finally, how to kind of get over this and how we can create a new idea of power that doesn't necessarily have the same constraints with these stories we've been telling each other since the 7th century BC. The way that I really think we can get over this is to utilize something that's new, something that no one's ever had before, no other generation has been able to utilize, and that namely is the internet. So speaking of the internet, I wanted to talk a little bit about change.org. Now, change.org was the platform that I used for the Tampon Tax Campaign, but it's also one of the biggest online campaigning platforms that we have access to today. Now, on change.org, they said that the majority of their petitions have been started by men, but the majority of their successful petitions, so the petitions that reach their goal, not only were started and have been started by women, but they've been majoritively signed by women and shared by women as well. And that's a really exciting fact, because it shows that this new political world that we're creating for ourselves online is not only spearheaded by women, but also the market is mainly consisting of women too. And therefore, there is a real appetite for female-led changes. Not only this, but the internet also favours a sidelined view. So any kind of campaigns that are to do with racism, tackling lots of different isms in our society, are more likely to be shared online because it's a view that we haven't heard before, and therefore it's more likely to get traction. This is really exciting because basically we don't know where it will end yet. It's a brand new thing that no other generation has had, and therefore we get to define where it ends and where it will take us to. So just as an example, if I can talk a couple minutes about the Tampon Tax Campaign. So I started this campaign in my bedroom when I was a student here in London in 2014. And I essentially just found online that period products are taxed 5% because apparently they're luxury items, and other items escape tax altogether because apparently they're more essential. And these items include maintaining our private helicopters, because apparently we all have them, or like eating alcoholic sugar jellies, eating horse meat and crocodile meat, which are specifically named in HMRC. These kind of complete illogical things that riddle our tax system is shocking to most people. It's these kind of things that we have to pay into, and we don't even know that we're doing it. And the really exciting thing about the Tampon Tax Campaign was, normally when I tell people this, they're quite shocked. So it's not necessarily about convincing people this needs to happen. It's just talking to people about it, making people feel like they can talk about menstruation and basically issues that have traditionally been associated with women and therefore not spoken about. And the second that I realized this was going to be a campaign that I really desperately wanted to succeed was when I went home to Devon and I met my friend Paul. And his mum came up to me and she said, "Laura, I really like you're campaigning against the Tampon Tax Campaign. And I really like it specifically because I used to campaign on this when I was your age." And that's when I realized this was such a generational effort to end tampon tax. It seems so simple, seems like we shouldn't have to talk about it, and it's so obviously wrong. And yet it's not happened, and people have been campaigning this for so long. Then I realized, well, first of all, I thought, why should my campaign be successful if so many other women's campaigns against us have not been as successful? At that point, I realized, well, it's going to be successful now because we have something we've never had before, and that is the online platform to power and to air our voices and air our campaigns. So since that day when I spoke to Paul's mum, a lot has changed. Thanks to the internet and my friends sharing this petition online and talking to each other about it, we've managed to get over 300,000 signatures, We've changed EU law and UK law, so that not only we're going to end tampon tax here in the UK, but any country across the European Union will be able to axe it too if they so want to. We've also seen the spread of sister petitions across the world, and they are covering every single continent now, which is really exciting. And a lot of these sister petitions have won in places that perhaps you might think they could struggle to win. Places like India and Colombia, but also places like Canada. Our Canadian sister petition was particularly interesting because they won simply within 6 months of starting a petition, which shows the real power of the internet. So essentially, I really hope that you can go away from this talk and realise that if you voice your opinions and your campaigns and your solutions to problems that you face online and tell your stories online, they can have a real impact. I hope that you have decided that now is our time more than ever to make waves, to challenge narratives, to influence policies, and create our own movements online and define the limits of that. Thank you.